Hello, Danusia here. If we've not met before, I'm founder of a consultancy working in boardrooms by day, and by night you'll find me writing books and The Parents Who Think Substack, as well as hosting and producing award-winning podcasts. Oh, and I'm also mother of 10 kids. Today, I'm getting into the heart of motherhood with Jo Wimble-Groves, entrepreneur, mother of 3, writer and speaker. In 2016, Jo began the blog Guilty Mother to open the conversation on feelings of guilt. Jo and I chat about breaking free from the shackles of parental guilt. Get ready for a dose of honesty and inspiration. Let's get started. I wanted to bring Jo Wimble-Groves into a conversation for us because she's a complete expert on the whole topic of guilt. She's studied it for many years now, and I thought that she would bring us a very different way of looking at it. And because it seems to be something that so many of us mothers really are crippled by. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be on your podcast.
I'm really wondering how you deal with your own guilt. I mean, do you have loads of it?
Not so much these days. I don't seem to be able to shake it off completely, but quite honestly, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I started writing the blog in the first place, because I had this feeling of mum guilt and I didn't really know what to do with it or where to go with it. And, when my daughter was quite young and I'd gone back to work, I just found myself Googling mum guilt because I just assumed that I wasn't alone. And what I actually found, which was to my surprise, I actually couldn't find very much at all. And because I couldn't find very much on this topic, I just decided to start writing about it myself. And that just seemed like a really good way of maybe helping myself to feel a bit better. Maybe some of these feelings are very natural, these feelings of guilt. It's just how you channel them and maybe how much it consumes you.
Yeah, that idea that when you looked there wasn't anything much on it must have been a bit odd, really. I can't imagine. I mean, now there's so much on guilt, isn't there?
Oh, I know. I mean, even one of my friends was telling me last week, she was watching the breakfast news and they're talking everything parenting guilt, and she screenshotted it and sent it to me. She went, everyone's talking about this all the time. You've opened a conversation. I hope I've opened a conversation in such a positive way. It's one of those emotions, isn't it, that can be understood in so many different ways. Is it an emotion that, we should have? Because if you didn't feel guilty, would that mean that you don't care?
Yeah, what do you think? I mean, I meet women, working women particularly all over the world, and particularly in conferences like you do. And sometimes they come up to me, Jo, and say, I don't really feel guilty, but I do feel guilty about not feeling guilty. What should I do, Danusia?
Oh, how funny.
Now, because there's so much about guilt, they're feeling in the minority because it's assumed that mothers will feel guilty now because it's so, you've changed the conversation. There's no doubt. You pioneered that and they don't feel it. So that's the only thing they feel guilty about. There's this moment in my conversation with Jo when she says how often children say things to mothers like this.
Mummy, you're abandoning us.
And don't these words tug at our hearts, no matter how much we want or have to do what we're planning? Aren't children fabulous at knowing our Achilles heels? They're so good at just getting in there and knowing our little fragilities, our vulnerabilities about them.
Oh, I'm probably not. As you say, it's definitely the Achilles heel. And, if I talk to my husband about it, he's like, they're not like that with him. It's definitely all for my personal benefit,
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. And I can't quite put my finger on it. Is it just because I'm a woman and a mum? But it shouldn't be like that because, we see, don't we, in households that the husband and the wife or the partner, they take so many sort of shared responsibilities now. The typical family home has changed a lot. So with so many more shared responsibilities, why should the guilt still be leaning to one side more than another? Can't we share it a little bit more?
Well, I think our culture tends to still kind of hammer home very in some gentle ways, but also some quite hard ways that our primary purpose is to be the devoted, intensive mother model. And therefore, I'm not sure that fathers really are under that same cosh. Not really. So I think our children, they can't really help but pick up on this, even in the most progressive of families. They hit up against a culture outside the home that there are different ways of doing it. And I just think the message is so strong that, for instance, in education, meetings that are in the middle of the day, who can ever attend those?
Well, I mean, especially being a woman in tech myself, it is actually wonderful to see how technology has changed the way that we live and work. Obviously, it can be detrimental in some instances because, I mean, as women and men, we find it really difficult to know where that blurred line is of when we come home and put our work down and when family life starts, because it feels like we're on our phones more than ever.
So things are shifting. It's a shame that internally, from an emotional perspective, we're still kind of bonded together in this guilt club, that women still
Yeah.
torture ourselves with this kind of almost self-flagellation about all sorts of things. It's not about just one thing, but there's so many things that we feel guilty about. And I think that is a great shame because it's an energy. From my perspective, it feels like an energy drain. When I'm concentrating on feeling guilty, then I can't concentrate on more productive things. So I'm wondering whether you see it as in any way positive. I mean, beyond it shows you care, which 99.9%, I'm presuming do care. So I'm just wondering what beyond that.
I think it's definitely tricky. I mean, I refer to the little relationship that I have with guilt. I refer to as the guilt burglar because he comes and steals all of my energy because I know
Yes.
that I'm not channeling it in the right way. So I would probably say that I'm, 75% there on feeling less guilty, really. But as you alluded to earlier, I definitely haven't shaken it off, and I wish I could come on and sort of have all the answers of how to feel less guilt about it. But I suppose, I try to think about channeling the positive energy. So I like to think that the work that I'm trying to do at the moment, whether it's supporting women enabling to thrive in their roles or move into more senior positions, as well as going into schools and universities and colleges to talk to children about entrepreneurship and finding their skill and their own confidence. That work is really important to me, and I really hope that my daughter will be really proud of me. So that thought in my mind helps me to channel my guilt and allows me to accept the guilt and then let it wash over me a little bit more, because I hope one day she'll turn around and say, "Mum, I'm really proud of you. The work that you did is actually trying to help other people."
Yes, I would imagine she will do that. I hope so. And although our children do, as they grow, surprise us, as a mother of older children. Tell me, when you talked about going into schools, do you see young women feeling guilty? Do you see it happening before females become mothers?
No, I don't. I don't. And there is this very famous saying that when you have a baby, they pull out the placenta and shove guilt in, and that normally
I hate
gets
that one.
people always gets a bit of a laugh because you know
But I absolutely hate it, that one.
because it obviously is not true, but it sometimes it feels like that, doesn't it? Because maybe you just have this overwhelming love for this child that you've just had. And that overwhelming sense of love means that you will do everything in your power to protect that child, because that is a love that you've never felt before, potentially. And then we set ourselves up for, I hate to say it, like perfect parenting, because you have in your mind at that moment that you'll do everything you possibly can for that child. And then when things don't quite go to plan, you've immediately just set yourself up for a big fall, haven't you?
Well, yeah, so many of us think that once they have children, they're going to make a better job of it. It's going to be much better.
Maybe.
It's, that they'll love their child in a different way, or they will be
Mm.
there if their mother wasn't, or father, or they won't be there if they were too much, whatever it is. We attempt to reinvent, review, reclaim all those things of our childhood. And then, of course, that goes completely differently than we ever imagined, because those children don't turn out to be something that it just doesn't. It generally doesn't happen. And I think one of the things that I noticed about that, when I said, "Oh, I hate that," yes, take the baby out and guilt goes back in, is that the more that we say that, the more it becomes a fulfilling prophecy. So the more that we say things, "Oh, yes, to be a mother is to be guilty."
You don't need to feel guilty, but underneath everybody is, scrambling around trying to have that vision of looking like a swan on top, but underneath we're pedaling like crazy, trying to make it look effortless. But we all know that parenting in general it's the hardest job we will ever do.
Yes, undeniably, that is true. I love what you're saying. So the other kind of lie, I think, that's sitting in the guilt debate is that guilt equals love. But I think somehow this guilt has got collapsed into the more love that you have, therefore the more guilt you'll have. Therefore, if you don't feel guilty, does that mean you actually don't love? So I'm wondering what you think about that one.
Oh, I think that's a really tricky one because, like we said earlier, guilt is a normal emotion that we all carry, but sometimes I don't know if it is related to how much we love a child, but I think we can just know exactly. So I really do. I'm super guilty. I must love my children more than anybody else. But no, I think that is a very tricky question because it's too difficult to quantify. But sometimes we just feel dabbles of guilt, such as, are we giving our kids too much screen time, or I've just given them a ham sandwich instead of cooking them loads of courgettes and broccoli and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes we can just feel little dabbles of guilt rather than an overwhelming rise of, we shout at them sometimes because they're not putting their shoes on when we try to run out the door, and then we feel a bit bad about it. Maybe that was right, maybe that was wrong. But sometimes the guilt just allows us to reflect.
Jo's point about guilt, allowing us to reflect, is a great one. For many parents, guilt runs out of control, but if we can use it positively to inform our choices, then maybe it doesn't shackle us. I told Jo this. There's one quote that I've always found really handy, and for me it really relates to this whole idea of guilt. And it's something that Stephen Covey wrote. And he said this: you have to decide what your highest priorities are and have the courage, non-apologetically, to say no to things. And the way to do that is by having a bigger yes burning inside. So finding the answer to our bigger yes burning inside us is the key. I'm wondering what yes for you eclipses your mum guilt. Because when we get fixed on our yeses, I've had a bit of a suspicion that our guilt doesn't rule us quite as much. We can say that absolutely every mother is going to feel it, in quite a substantial way. It's not so. It doesn't have to be so.
I agree. Absolutely.
It's been wonderful speaking with you today and having this chat. Thank you so much. You're absolutely a superstar. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap on my conversation with Jo. Unraveling the complexities of maternal guilt is certainly not easy. Remember, it's okay to embrace our imperfections and strive for progress, not being perfect. Let's support each other on this journey of parenthood and celebrate the incredible force of motherhood. Until next time, keep thinking and loving. Take care, everyone.